The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, transmitted through quantum channels that spanned half the galaxy. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the communications center of Earth Defense Command, watching the holographic seal of the Galactic Council rotate slowly in the air. The symbol was ancient, carved from traditions older than human civilization. 847 species had signed their names to that seal over the past 3,000 years. Now, for the first time in Council history, that seal carried a summons. Emergency session. Ambassador Marcus Webb read from the official document, his weathered face creased with concern. All human representatives are required to appear before the full assembly within 30 standard days. He paused, his finger tracing the formal script. The charges are listed as excessive aggression and violation of civilized warfare protocols. Chen felt her jaw tighten. Humans had been members of the Galactic Council for only 5 years, ever since first contact with the Valdorian trade ships. In that short time, they had fought exactly 2 conflicts. Both had ended in human victory. Both had been decisive. "What protocols?" she asked. "Nobody ever gave us any protocols." Webb shook his head slowly. "That appears to be part of the problem. The first conflict had been with the Zelathi pirates. These weren't desperate criminals, stealing food for their families. The Zelathi were an organized fleet of raiders who had been attacking merchant ships for over 2 centuries. The Council's response had always been the same. Send a few warships to patrol the trade routes, engage in limited skirmishes, and accept that piracy was simply a cost of doing business in space. The humans had taken a different approach. When Zelathi raiders attacked a human cargo ship, Admiral Chen had mobilized the entire Third Fleet. They didn't patrol trade routes. They hunted down every Zelathi base, disabled their ships, and captured their leaders. The war lasted 6 weeks. The second conflict had been more serious. The Korthak hegemony had claimed ownership of 3 human colonies, declaring that the systems belonged to them by right of ancient conquest. According to Council records, the Korthak had filed a territorial claim over those systems nearly 400 years ago, then done absolutely nothing about it. The Council's suggested response was to enter into negotiations. These negotiations, they explained, would likely take several decades to resolve. In the meantime, the human colonies could pay tribute to the Korthak as a gesture of good faith. The humans had a different idea. Admiral Chen's forces had surrounded the Korthak fleet, demanded their immediate withdrawal. And when the Korthak refused, disabled every ship in their armada within 48 hours. The Korthak had surrendered unconditionally rather than lose their entire navy. Both conflicts had shocked the galactic community, not because the humans had won, but because they had won so quickly and so completely. Elder Thexara of the Valdorian Empire will be presiding. Webb continued reading. She specifically requested that all human military commanders attend in person. Chen knew about Thexara. The Valdorians were one of the oldest species in the Council, and Thexara had held her position for over 3 centuries. The Valdorian Empire controlled 47 star systems and had been involved in 17 major conflicts during the past millennium. They had won exactly 3 of them. According to galactic standards, this made them highly successful. "Admiral," Webb said carefully, "I've been reviewing the historical records of Council warfare. I think we may have misunderstood how things work out here." He activated a holographic display showing the last major conflict between the Valdorians and the Nixari Federation. The war had lasted 83 years. Battle reports showed endless cycles of attack and counterattack, with neither side ever pressing their advantages. Casualties numbered in the hundreds of millions, but the vast majority were civilians caught in prolonged sieges and occupation zones. "Look at this." Webb pointed to a tactical analysis. The Valdorian fleet had the Nexari capital world surrounded for 6 months. They had complete orbital supremacy. Instead of forcing a surrender, they negotiated a partial withdrawal in exchange for mining rights to 3 outer colonies. Chen studied the data with growing disbelief. They could have ended the war. Why didn't they? "Because that would have been uncivilized," Webb said quietly. "I've been talking to other ambassadors. Apparently, There's an entire code of conduct for galactic warfare. Wars are supposed to be limited affairs. You fight until both sides have demonstrated their courage and resolve. Then you negotiate a settlement that allows everyone to save face. And if the enemy won't surrender, then you keep fighting at a low level until they change their minds, sometimes for centuries. Chen walked to the viewport and stared out at the blue marble of Earth spinning slowly below them. Humanity had crawled out of caves and built starships in just a few thousand years. They had done it by solving problems, not by managing them indefinitely. "How many species are on this council?" she asked. 847, Webb replied. "And how many of them have actually won a war in the past century?" Webb consulted his files. "By our definition of victory? 12. And most of those were against species that weren't council members." The pieces were starting to fit together. The Galactic Council wasn't a government of species who had mastered warfare. It was a club for species who had agreed to fight wars without actually trying to win them. And now humanity was being called to account for the crime of being too effective. 3 weeks later, Admiral Chen and Ambassador Webb boarded the diplomatic cruiser Endeavour for the journey to Concordia Prime. The massive ring station served as the Council's headquarters, a structure so vast it had its own weather systems. It had been built to impress, and it succeeded. As their ship approached the docking bay, Chen looked out at the hundreds of other vessels already moored to the station. Each one represented a different species, a different culture, a different way of thinking about the universe. Soon, she would stand before all of them and answer for humanity's sins. She found herself looking forward to it. The council chambers were designed to make visitors feel small. The vast amphitheater stretched upward for nearly a kilometer, its walls lined with thousands of seats arranged in perfect circles. Each seat represented a species, a civilization, a voice in the galactic community. The air itself seemed heavy, with the weight of history and tradition. Admiral Chen and Ambassador Webb entered through the main doors, their footsteps echoing in the enormous space. Around them, beings of every imaginable shape and size filled the seats. Some were humanoid, others were crystalline structures that communicated through light patterns. A few existed as energy clouds contained within specially designed force fields. At the center of it all, on a raised platform that seemed to float in midair, sat Elder Thexara of the Valdorian Empire. She was tall and elegant, her skin a pale blue that shifted color with her emotions. Her species aged slowly, and at over 400 years old, she commanded respect throughout the galaxy. "The emergency session is now in order," Thexara announced, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the chamber. "We are here to address the unprecedented actions of the species known as humanity." -Gram. Webb had warned Chen that this would not be a trial in any human sense. There would be no defense attorney, no jury of peers, no presumption of innocence. This was a formal scolding by the galactic community, designed to put the newcomers in their proper place. "The charges are serious," Thexara continued. "Excessive aggression in military operations, failure to follow established protocols of civilized warfare." Thexara, and most troubling of all, the complete disregard for the cultural norms that have maintained galactic peace for over 3 millennia. A three-dimensional display materialized above the platform, showing footage from the Zalathi conflict. Chen watched herself on screen, standing on the bridge of the flagship Defiance, as human marines boarded a disabled pirate vessel. "Observe the brutal efficiency," Thexara said with disgust. "Human forces show no regard for the traditional protocols of engagement. They board enemy vessels while they are still operational. They fight in close quarters with projectile weapons. Most shocking of all, they fight with the clear intention of achieving total victory." Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the assembly. Chen noticed that many species were making gestures that seemed to indicate agreement with the Elder's assessment. The display shifted to show the final battle with the Zalathi. Human ships had surrounded the pirate fleet, cutting off all escape routes. When the pirates refused to surrender, the humans had systematically disabled every enemy vessel within 6 hours. This is not how civilized beings conduct warfare, Thexara declared. Where are the formal challenges? Where are the ritual combats between champions? Where is the careful dance of advance and retreat that allows both sides to demonstrate their valor? Ambassador Webb leaned forward in his seat. He had studied the records of Valdorian conflicts, and he knew exactly what Thexara was referring to. Valdorian warfare was indeed a dance, an elaborate performance where both sides took turns demonstrating their military prowess without seriously attempting to destroy each other. The display changed again, this time showing the conflict with the Korthak hegemony. The massive Korthak battleships hung in space like metal mountains, their hulls bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. The Korthak hegemony filed legitimate territorial claims 4 centuries ago, Thexara explained. The proper response would have been to enter into negotiations, perhaps lasting several decades, to reach an equitable settlement. The screen showed what actually happened. Human ships had appeared without warning, surrounding the Korthak fleet. Admiral Chen's voice could be heard clearly across the communication channels. You have 12 hours to withdraw from human space. If you are still here when the deadline passes, we will disable your ships and take your crews prisoner. 12 hours. Thexara's voice rose with indignation. Proper territorial negotiations require years of careful diplomacy. The humans gave them 12 hours. Chen had given them 12 hours because that was how long it would take for Korthak reinforcements to arrive. Every hour of delay meant more enemy ships to deal with, more risk to human colonists, and a higher chance that the conflict would spread to other systems. The Korthak had chosen to fight rather than withdraw. The battle lasted 37 minutes. Observe the savagery, Thexara continued as the display showed human ships ramming damaged Korthak vessels. Human commanders deliberately sacrifice their own ships to disable the enemy. This is not courage. This is madness. Civilized warfare requires that both sides preserve their military assets for future conflicts. The elder gestured toward a section of seats occupied by the Korthak delegation. Their leader, a massive creature covered in thick armor plating, stood slowly. The humans fight like wild animals, the Korthak representative said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the chamber. They show no mercy, no honor, no understanding of proper military conduct. Other voices joined in. The Nexari Federation complained that human tactics were unnecessarily decisive. The Crystalline Collective argued that human warfare was aesthetically offensive. Even species that had never fought a war, in their existence, stood up to criticize humanity's aggressive approach to conflict resolution. As Chen listened to speaker after speaker, a pattern began to emerge. These species hadn't just developed elaborate rules for warfare. They had turned war itself into a cultural institution. Wars were expected to last for decades or centuries. They were opportunities for young officers to prove themselves, for engineers to test new technologies, for poets to write epic songs about heroic battles. The idea that war might actually end with one side completely defeating the other was not just foreign to them, it was deeply offensive. The Galactic Council has maintained peace for 3,000 years, Thexara said, as the complaints finally died down. We have achieved this through careful balance, mutual respect, and the understanding that conflicts must be resolved through patience and wisdom, not through brute force. She turned her attention directly to the human delegation. Species of humanity, you have been members of our community for 5 years. In that time, you have fought 2 wars and achieved 2 decisive victories. This cannot continue. Chen felt her temper rising. Around her, hundreds of species were nodding in agreement with the elder's words. These were civilizations that had mastered interstellar travel, that had unlocked the secrets of quantum communication, that had built wonders spanning entire solar systems. And they were upset because humans were too good at winning wars. The elder raised her hand for silence. The Council will now hear the human response to these charges. Ambassador Webb stood slowly, straightening his formal diplomatic uniform. The chamber fell silent, as nearly 1,000 beings turned their attention toward the small human delegation. Chen realized that this was the moment that would define humanity's relationship with the galactic community for generations to come. Webb stepped forward toward the speaking platform, his voice calm and measured when he began to address the assembly. Ambassador Webb walked to the center of the speaking platform, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Nearly 1,000 beings watched him from the amphitheater seats, their alien faces showing expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The weight of their attention was almost physical. Honored Elder Thexara, distinguished representatives of the Galactic Council, Webb began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. Humanity stands accused of excessive aggression and violation of civilized warfare protocols. He paused, letting his words sink in. Before I respond to these charges, I must ask a simple question. When humanity joined this council 5 years ago, why were we never informed of these protocols? A ripple of confusion passed through the assembly. Elder Thexara's skin shifted to a darker blue, a sign of irritation among her species. Such knowledge should be instinctive to any truly civilized species, she replied coldly. The principles of proper warfare have governed galactic conflict for millennia. They are not rules that need to be taught. They are natural expressions of civilized behavior. Webb nodded thoughtfully. I see. So these protocols are instinctive, natural. The way that civilized beings naturally conduct warfare. He activated a portable holographic display, and suddenly, the chamber was filled with images from the Council's own historical records. Let me share with you what humanity has learned about civilized warfare during our brief membership in this council. The first image showed a planet under siege. The world was brown and lifeless, its surface scarred by orbital bombardment. The Valdorian-Nexari conflict. Year 47 of 83. The siege of Nexar Prime. Elder Thexara's expression darkened, but Webb continued. According to your own military reports, the Valdorian fleet maintained orbital blockade of this world for 6 years. 6 years during which no supplies reached the surface, no medical aid, no food shipments. The image shifted to show refugee camps overflowing with civilians. Casualty reports indicate that 4 million civilians died during this siege, not from weapons fire, from starvation and disease. Murmurs of discomfort began to spread through the assembly. These were not images that the council typically discussed in their sessions. And yet, Webb continued, the Valdorian fleet never attempted to force a surrender. They maintained what their tactical reports call civilized pressure for 6 years, while millions of innocents died. That is not relevant to these proceedings, Thexara said sharply. The Nexari-Valdorian conflict was conducted according to proper protocols. Both sides demonstrated courage and honor. Did they? Webb asked. He gestured to Admiral Chen, who stood and walked to join him at the platform. Admiral Chen commanded our forces in both conflicts you've criticized, Webb said. Perhaps she can explain the difference between civilized warfare and effective warfare. Chen stepped forward, her military bearing evident in every movement. Unlike the elaborate robes and ceremonial attire worn by most council representatives, she wore a simple uniform with minimal decorations. The Zalathi pirates had been raiding merchant vessels for over 2 centuries, she said without preamble. According to council records, the average response to pirate attacks was to send patrol ships to chase them away temporarily. The pirates would retreat, wait a few months, then resume their attacks. She activated her own display, showing shipping routes crisscrossed with attack markers. In 200 years of civilized anti-piracy operations, the Council never actually solved the problem. You managed it. You treated piracy as a permanent feature of galactic commerce, rather than a problem to be eliminated. Pirates serve a useful function in galactic society, interrupted a representative from the hegemony of merchant worlds. They provide opportunities for young naval officers to gain combat experience without the risks of major warfare. Chen stared at the speaker in disbelief. You kept pirates around as a training exercise? It is traditional, Thexara said firmly. Certain criminal elements have always existed at the fringes of civilization. Complete elimination of such groups would rob future generations of valuable learning opportunities. Those learning opportunities cost the lives of every civilian killed in pirate raids, Chen replied. When the Zealothi attacked human shipping, we didn't see a training opportunity. We saw a problem that needed to be solved permanently. The display shifted to show the final assault on the main Zealothi base. Human Marines moved through the asteroid facility with ruthless efficiency, stunning pirates and securing their weapons. We didn't kill them all, Chen pointed out. We captured them, dismantled their organization, and turned their leaders over to the appropriate authorities. The piracy problem in that sector has been eliminated. For now, Thexara said dismissively. New pirate groups will emerge. They always do. Not if you actually prosecute the ones you capture instead of treating them as a permanent nuisance, Chen replied. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Several species accused the humans of being naive about the complexities of galactic politics. Others argued that complete military victories destabilized the careful balance of power that kept the peace. Webb raised his voice above the chaos. You call your warfare civilized because it follows ancient traditions, but let me show you what your civilized wars actually accomplish. The display changed to show a comprehensive analysis of Council conflicts over the past millennium. Graphs and charts filled the air, showing casualty figures, economic costs, and duration of conflicts. In the past 1,000 years, the Council has been involved in 47 major conflicts, Webb announced. The average duration was 61 years. The average civilian casualty count was 43 million per conflict. Total deaths from Council warfare in the past millennium exceed 2 billion beings. The chamber fell silent as the numbers sank in. Now let me show you the results of human barbaric warfare, Webb continued. The display shifted to show the two human conflicts. Total duration of both wars combined, 6 weeks. Total military casualties, 12,000. Total civilian casualties, 0. That proves nothing, Thexara said. But her voice lacked its earlier conviction. You have fought only minor conflicts against inferior opponents. Have we? Admiral Chen asked. The Korthak fleet that we defeated included 17 heavy cruisers and 4 dreadnought-class battleships. According to your own tactical assessments, that force was capable of conquering a dozen star systems. She gestured to the Korthak representative, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. We gave them 12 hours to withdraw from human space. When they refused, we disabled their entire fleet in 37 minutes without destroying a single ship or killing a single crew member. Impossible, declared a voice from the Stellar Federation delegation. No force could defeat a Korthak battle fleet that quickly, without massive losses. You're right, Chen agreed. No force using civilized warfare tactics could achieve that result. But we weren't trying to demonstrate our honor or provide training opportunities for our officers. We were trying to end the conflict as quickly and decisively as possible. The display showed the tactical recording of the battle. Human ships moved in coordinated formations, targeting specific systems on the Korthak vessels. Instead of the stately exchanges of fire typical of Council warfare, the engagement resembled a surgical operation. You see? Thexara said triumphantly. This is exactly what we mean by uncivilized conduct. Human forces show no regard for proper military etiquette, no formal challenges, no opportunities for individual combat, no chance for the enemy to demonstrate their valor before surrendering. End. Webb looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species watching the exchange. Honored Elder, with all due respect, I believe you have confused civilization with ritual. You have turned warfare into elaborate ceremony designed to minimize decisive outcomes. His voice grew stronger as he continued. You call us uncivilized for ending conflicts quickly, for minimizing casualties, for actually solving problems instead of managing them indefinitely. But I must ask you this question. If your civilized warfare is so superior, why has it failed to bring peace to the galaxy? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elder Thexara's skin had shifted to a deep purple, a color that indicated either deep thought or barely controlled rage. "Peace is not the absence of conflict," she said finally. "Peace is the proper management of conflict through established traditions and mutual respect." Webb nodded slowly. "And that, honored elder, is where humanity fundamentally disagrees with the Council's philosophy." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. In 3,000 years of Council history, no species had ever openly rejected the fundamental principles of galactic civilization. Elder Thexara rose from her seat, her full height making her an imposing figure. "Are you saying that humanity refuses to abide by the established norms of civilized warfare?" Webb looked at Admiral Chen, who gave him a slight nod. The moment of truth had arrived. "No, honored elder," Webb said clearly. "We are saying that we reject the premise that your warfare is civilized at all." The words struck the chamber like a physical blow. 847 species sat in stunned silence as the full meaning of Ambassador Webb's statement sank in. Nobody had ever challenged the fundamental principles of Council civilization. Not in 3,000 years. Elder Thexara's skin had turned a deep, angry purple. Her voice shook with barely controlled rage when she finally spoke. "You dare to question 3 millennia of galactic civilization? You savage barbarians who understand nothing but violence?" Webb remained calm in the face of her fury. "We understand violence very well, Elder Thexara. That's precisely why we try to end it, as quickly as possible. Your species has been among the stars for less than a century," Thexara snapped. "We have been building civilizations since before your ancestors learned to use fire. You have no right to judge us." Admiral Chen stepped forward, her military bearing a stark contrast to the ornate ceremonial dress of the Council representatives. "Age doesn't make something right, Elder. It just makes it old." The chamber erupted in outraged voices. Representatives of dozens of species rose from their seats, shouting denunciations of human arrogance. The translator system struggled to keep up with the chaos of overlapping languages and dialects. Through it all, Webb stood calmly at the center of the platform, waiting for the storm to pass. When the noise finally died down, he activated his holographic display one more time. "You want to know what we think of your civilized warfare?" he asked. "Let me show you." The display filled with images from Council conflicts spanning the past millennium. Siege lines that had remained static for decades. Refugee camps that had become permanent cities. Battlefields where the same ground had changed hands dozens of times over the course of centuries. "The Talar Beneji Border War," Webb announced. "Duration: 143 years. Casualties: 67 million. Outcome: both sides agreed to maintain the status quo after spending over a century fighting for the right to rule empty space. The Great Crystal Crusade: 89 years of conflict over mining rights to asteroids that were completely depleted before the war ended. The Hegemony Succession Crisis: 212 years of fighting to determine who would rule a dynasty that collapsed from the economic strain of the war itself. With each example, Webb's voice grew harder. "You call this civilization? You have turned warfare into entertainment. You fight wars not to achieve objectives, but to demonstrate that you're capable of fighting. You treat the deaths of billions as acceptable losses in your elaborate games of honor and tradition." Elder Thexara slammed her fist on her chair's armrest. "Those conflicts were resolved according to proper protocols. Both sides had opportunities to demonstrate their courage and achieve glory." "Glory?" Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Tell me about the glory of the children who starved during your 6-year siege of Nexar Prime. Explain the honor in prolonging conflicts for centuries, while civilians suffer in the crossfire." She gestured toward the Korthak delegation. "Your hegemony claimed ownership of 3 human colonies based on territorial claims filed 400 years ago. Claims you never acted on. Claims you never enforced. You only decided those worlds were important to you after humans had spent decades building cities and raising families there." The massive Korthak representative stood slowly. "Those worlds belong to us, by right of ancient conquest," he rumbled. Ancient conquest of what? Chen demanded. Those systems were uninhabited when we found them. Your conquest consisted of filing paperwork with the Council and then doing absolutely nothing for 4 centuries. Proper territorial claims require patience, Thexara interjected. The Korthak were following established procedures for asserting sovereignty over frontier systems. Webb laughed, and the sound was bitter. Patience. You call it patience to file a claim on empty space, and then wait 400 years to do anything about it. But when we actually settle and develop those worlds, when we build homes and schools and hospitals, suddenly, we're the aggressors for refusing to hand everything over. He turned to address the entire assembly. Do you want to know what humanity learned about the Council during our 5 years of membership? We learned that you have confused procedure with justice. You have replaced decisive action with endless deliberation. You have created a system where the only unforgivable crime is actually solving problems. The chamber had grown quiet again. But it was a different kind of silence. Several species were exchanging uncertain glances. The human words were striking uncomfortably close to truths that many council members had privately acknowledged but never voiced. The council has maintained peace for 3,000 years, Thexara said, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Have you? Webb challenged. Or have you simply institutionalized conflict to the point where nobody expects wars to actually end? You haven't maintained peace, Elder. You've maintained a permanent state of managed warfare. Elder Thexara rose to her full height, her purple skin now shifting toward a dangerous red. Enough. You will not stand in this sacred chamber and insult millennia of civilized progress. Civilized progress? Admiral Chen stepped forward until she was directly in front of the Elder's platform. Your civilized progress has given us a galaxy where wars last for centuries, where entire generations are born and die in refugee camps, where pirates are allowed to operate freely because they provide training opportunities for naval officers. You want to know what's really uncivilized? Chen continued, her voice rising. It's treating the deaths of millions as an acceptable price for maintaining your precious traditions. It's allowing suffering to continue indefinitely because ending it quickly would violate your sense of proper procedure. The Elder's skin had turned a deep crimson. You savage barbarians understand nothing of civilization. You know only how to kill and destroy. We know how to end wars, Chen replied coldly. That seems to be something your civilization has forgotten how to do. Thexara stood trembling with rage. You will submit to council authority. You will accept limitations on your military expansion. You will learn to conduct warfare according to civilized standards. The words hung in the air like a sentence of execution. Around the chamber, hundreds of species watched the confrontation with fascination and horror. Never before had the Council's authority been challenged so directly. Ambassador Webb looked up at Elder Thexara, his expression sad but resolute. No, Elder. We won't. What did you say? Thexara's voice was barely above a whisper. Webb's voice carried clearly throughout the vast chamber. I said no. Humanity rejects your authority. We reject your civilized warfare. We reject this entire system that values procedure over results and tradition over justice. He began gathering his documents from the speaking platform. We came here, believing we were joining a council of equals, representatives of species who had mastered the challenges of interstellar civilization. Instead, we find ourselves in a court of cowards who have forgotten that the purpose of war is peace. Admiral Chen joined him, her expression grim but determined. When the next threat comes to your borders, and it will come, don't call us. We'll be busy protecting our own people, using methods you consider uncivilized. Elder Thexara's voice rose to a shriek. You cannot leave. No species has ever withdrawn from the Council. It is unprecedented. Webb paused at the edge of the platform and looked back at her. Elder Thexara, in the 5 years since humanity joined this council, we have learned many things about galactic civilization, but the most important thing we've learned is that sometimes being uncivilized is the only civilized choice. He turned toward the exit, Admiral Chen at his side. Earth formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately. We hereby renounce all treaties, agreements, and protocols that bind us to this organization. The human delegation began walking toward the massive doors of the chamber. Around them, the greatest gathering of civilized species in the galaxy watched in stunned horror. Behind them, Elder Thexara screamed orders for security forces to stop them, but no one moved. In 3,000 years of Council history, nothing like this had ever happened. There were no procedures for forcibly detaining a species that chose to leave. As the humans reached the doors, Webb turned for one final statement. His voice carried clearly across the silent chamber. When you finally realize that your civilized warfare has left you defenseless against real threats, remember this moment. Remember that you chose procedure over protection, tradition over truth. The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Galactic Council sat in absolute silence, watching the empty space where humanity had stood and wondering what terrible mistake they had just made. 6 months after humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Council, the first warning signals came from the Outer Rim territories. Deep space monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures moving through the void between galaxies. The signals were artificial, mechanical, and utterly alien. Elder Thexara stood in the Council's emergency command center, watching the incoming data with growing dread. The energy patterns matched ancient records that she had hoped never to see again. "Are you certain of these readings?" she asked the Crystalline Collective's representative, whose species served as the Council's primary sensor specialists. The being's crystalline structure flickered with nervous light patterns. "Confirmed, Elder. The signatures match historical archives from the last Devourer incursion, 3,000 years ago. The Devourers. Even the name was enough to send chills through every species that remembered the ancient stories. They were not organic beings, driven by hunger or ambition. They were artificial intelligences, machines built for a single purpose: to consume all organic life and convert it into raw materials for their endless expansion. The last time they had appeared, they had devoured 17 star systems before disappearing back into the void between galaxies. The Council had assumed they were gone forever. But the ancient archives contained warnings that they would return when their rebuilding cycle was complete. That cycle, apparently, had just ended. "How long until they reach Council space?" Thexara asked. "Based on their current trajectory and speed, approximately 6 months, came the reply. 6 months. Thexara felt her skin shift to a pale, worried blue. The last Devourer war had lasted 2 decades, and cost the lives of over 1 billion beings before the machines finally withdrew. That had been when the Council was young and aggressive, before civilized warfare had refined military doctrine into its current form. "Mobilize all available fleets," she ordered. "Alert every member species. We must prepare coordinated defensive operations." Over the following weeks, the greatest military force in galactic history assembled at the Rim territories. 300 species contributed ships to the massive fleet. Thousands of vessels from dozens of different technologies and design philosophies formed defensive lines across 100 star systems. The first contact came at the remote outpost of Kalar 7, a mining station on the very edge of Council space. The station's final transmission lasted 47 seconds. "Unknown vessels approaching. They appear to be... oh gods. They're huge." Attempting communication. No response. "They're not slowing down. They're not. They're firing. All hands to defensive positions. Mayday. Mayday. This is Kalar 7. We are under attack by..." Silence. The defense fleet moved to intercept, following protocols that had been developed over centuries of civilized warfare. Admiral Vexhai of the Nexari Federation, commanding the joint fleet, ordered a careful advance with scouts screening the main force. The scouts never returned. When the main fleet finally encountered the Devourer force, they found metal constructs the size of small moons, their hulls bristling with weapons that defied conventional understanding. The Devourers moved with mechanical precision, showing no interest in the careful formations and tactical displays that announced the beginning of civilized combat. Admiral Vex High opened communication channels and broadcast formal challenges in 47 different languages. He offered single combat between champions. He proposed limited engagement zones to minimize collateral damage. The Devourers responded by opening fire with weapons that could crack planets. The Battle of Kalar lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 2/3 of the Council fleet had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors retreated in disorder, carrying reports of an enemy that followed no recognizable rules of engagement. They don't fight like civilized beings. Admiral Vex High reported to the emergency session. His image flickered in the holographic display, transmitted from his heavily damaged flagship. They show no interest in honor or glory. No respect for military tradition. They simply attack with overwhelming force until all resistance is eliminated. Elder Thexara felt a chill of recognition. The Admiral's words sounded uncomfortably familiar. More fleets were assembled. More civilized tactics were attempted. The results were uniformly disastrous. The Devourers swept through the outer rim systems like a tide of metal death, consuming everything in their path. Planets were stripped bare of all organic matter. Space stations were harvested for raw materials. Entire populations simply vanished. The Council's military doctrine, refined over millennia of civilized warfare, proved completely useless against an enemy that didn't recognize the rules. Perhaps we should consider alternative approaches, suggested the representative from the hegemony of merchant worlds during one emergency session. The humans claimed that decisive action could end conflicts quickly. Perhaps we should study their methods. The suggestion was met with horrified silence. We will not abandon civilization to fight like barbarians, Thexara declared. There must be another way. But as system after system fell to the advancing Devourers, alternative solutions became increasingly difficult to find. The enemy showed no interest in negotiation. They couldn't be reasoned with or bargained with. They simply consumed everything organic and moved on to the next target. Desperate messages were sent to Earth through back channels. Unofficial communications from species that had quietly maintained diplomatic contact with humanity, despite the Council's disapproval. The responses were polite, but firm. Earth acknowledged the Council's situation but respectfully declined to become involved. Humanity had its own concerns and would focus on protecting its own territory. It wasn't until the Devourers reached human space that Earth finally acted. The first attack came at Titan Station, a human outpost on the edge of the Sol system. Unlike the Council's elaborate defensive preparations, the human response was swift and brutal. No formal challenges were issued. No attempts at communication were made. Human ships simply appeared and began firing. The galaxy watched in fascination and horror as Admiral Sarah Chen's forces engaged the Devourers using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Human ships rammed enemy vessels, their crews sacrificing themselves to deliver nuclear charges directly into Devourer hulls. Marine units boarded the mechanical constructs, fighting hand-to-hand combat in the corridors of alien machines. Most shocking of all, when human ships were disabled and faced capture, their crews deliberately triggered self-destruction sequences rather than allow their vessels to be harvested by the enemy. Barbaric, whispered Elder Thexara as she watched the tactical displays. Utterly barbaric. But the barbaric tactics were working. For the first time since the invasion began, Devourer forces were being stopped. Human fleets that should have been overwhelmed by the massive enemy constructs instead fought with a desperate ferocity that confused the mechanical intelligence. The Devourers had programmed their strategy based on thousands of years of studying Council warfare. They expected elaborate formations, formal engagements, and careful preservation of military assets. They were not prepared for an enemy that treated every battle as a fight to the death. Human captains who found themselves outgunned would ram their ships into critical enemy systems. Human marines would board Devourer constructs, carrying improvised explosive devices, turning themselves into living weapons. Human commanders made tactical decisions in seconds that Council doctrine would require days of committee deliberation to approve. The tide began to turn. not just in human space, but throughout the galaxy as other species watched and learned. Young officers began copying human tactics, despite the horrified protests of their superiors. Desperate planetary governments started ignoring Council directives and adopting what they called Terran-style defensive measures. The war that the Council's civilized fleets had been losing for months was suddenly winnable again. The final battle took place at the Nexus Point, the ancient hyperspace junction that connected the galaxy's major trade routes. If the Devourers captured it, they would have access to every inhabited system in Council space. Admiral Chen led a combined force of human ships and rebel Council vessels that had abandoned civilized warfare doctrine. The battle was everything that 3,000 years of military tradition said it shouldn't be. Brutal, decisive, and utterly without mercy. When it was over, the Devourer invasion force had been completely destroyed. Not defeated or driven back, but eliminated entirely. The ancient threat that had terrorized the galaxy was gone. In the aftermath, as the scattered Council fleets regrouped and began the long task of rebuilding, Elder Thexara found herself standing once again in the Great Chamber where humanity had renounced their membership 6 months earlier. Around her, representatives of dozens of species debated the lessons of the war. Some argued for military reforms. Others insisted on maintaining traditional doctrine. A few brave voices suggested that perhaps the Council should reconsider its relationship with humanity. But Elder Thexara wasn't listening to the debates. She was staring at the empty space where Ambassador Webb had stood when he delivered his final statement to the Assembly. The galaxy had been saved by the very barbarism she had condemned. The uncivilized warfare she had rejected had proven more effective than 3 millennia of refined military tradition. For the first time in her 400-year life, Elder Thexara began to wonder if humanity had been right all along. The thought terrified her almost as much as the Devourers had.